Beetlejuice, 36 years after the original release. The sequel is in theaters in September of 2024. I actually wore this to the theater, and my brother very kindly pointed out it was not the right color, which it's not. It should be black, and I was like, well, this is what we're working with, and we'll get through it together. Like, we'll get through it in this video together. But 36 years is a very long time, and there's a lot to be learned from the actors who reprised their roles. Majority of the cast did, except for the father in the original movie, who I believe actually died in real life and was the reason why they had a funeral for him in the movie. And if not, he must have decided not to, but I believe it's the first one. I didn't check. Sorry about that. And it was the same opening music, and it brought a lot of the people who saw the original right back to that moment in time, and a lot of them were asked throughout their whole careers, is there going to be a second one? And a lot of their careers were changed for the better because of the cult classic that Beetlejuice pretty much instantly became. And Winona Ryder herself said that the only reason she did Stranger Things was the producer will allow her to film Beetlejuice 2 if it happens. So she wrote that into her contract. And I believe Stranger Things came out like 10 years ago or so. So a long time in the making, and it had already been 20 years since the movie was released, and she still wrote it into her contract. And Jenna Ortega plays her daughter Astrid in the movie, where Winona reprises her role as Lydia, and there's a lot to be learned. 2 different generations coming together, 2 different experiences of the original versus being brand new. But what can we learn from it? And there was quite a few things that were running through my mind of like, wow, what does it mean to never move on from the original thing that you worked on? And how can you continue, still hold space for it, and just kind of move on? So there's a few things, but the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of moving on. Now, Winona Ryder went on to film many other movies and has had a career over these past 36 years. It wasn't like it was Beetlejuice and done, but she was asked about it all the time. So what do you do when somebody's constantly asking you about your past that you don't want to talk about, or that you want to say like, hey, I've done other things and I'd rather focus on that? Well, the thing is, you get to decide what you disclose about your history and what you speak upon. When you don't answer someone's question, they're very likely to not follow up with another one. And that is something that I have experienced. Having gone through what I have this year, people will ask me about my previous job, and if I pretty much give them a non-answer, where it's like, yeah, I learned a lot, and I was out in the field where I had this experience, and if you can hone in on what you learned instead of if you express the context of what you learned versus the people, that's going to be a lot easier to get you out of having to explain anymore. When you're like, yeah, I learned a lot, and you just put it in a good light and just kind of keep it moving, people are very likely to drop it, because most of the time people just want the drama and what happened. And it was very interesting. Somebody said, well, at your company, I heard that the politics changed when this company took over. And I was like, they pay me to be an engineer and not a politician, so I really can't speak on it. Everyone laughed, and then they kind of moved on. So you can do the same thing, where you just kind of brush upon your experience. You can say something you learned, or that, hey, it was something that happened, and then talk about the weather. Like, people are very likely to stop pressing something if you just kind of brush upon it, and you're just like, it was something, but you just keep moving on. And you also have to make sure that you don't reveal too many emotions about it. If you can keep a smile, or if you can just continue with whatever face you have, if you don't drastically change the way you look or the way you're expressing a certain emotion when they ask you that question, it is also a lot easier to kind of brush over it. If they're like, oh, what was it like working at your previous company? And I was like, well, I hated it. Like, then people would be more interested. But if they're like, well, how was your previous company? And I'm just like, oh, like, I learned a lot and I moved on. Very few people are going to be like, I want to know more about that because I didn't give them any room to continue the conversation. So you can cut off people pretty easily if you just kind of keep the same manner and just be like, you know what, I don't really want to talk about this. But what if it's like very recent, like you broke up with your boyfriend the other day and people are like, well, what are the details? Like, what happened? And that is a lot harder to do when you're in the middle of the emotions. It was much harder to do that kind of like, all right, flip it and just kind of keep going. But you have to detach yourself from what this person needs to know. Your life's on a need to know basis, and most people don't need to know anything about your life. If it's somebody who's close to you who's asking this question, then yes, you feel that trust between them and that you care about their opinion and you care to share because it's going to help you. Is sharing this information with this specific person going to help you deal with the situation that was or is still currently going on? And if the answer to that is no, this random person who is also in the industry but I never really talked to before just wants to know what happened, you don't need to tell them anything because you're not getting anything out of that exchange. You are not feeling better because you shared this, and usually you'll feel worse after because you kind of showed your hand and you're like, man, I wish that they didn't know that I was still wrapped up in my emotions with it. And then you're like, but it's okay to be emotional about something that happened, and it is, but not everybody deserves access to your emotions, and that is something that I had to learn as well. And this is something that the entire cast had to deal with as well, is they loved Beetlejuice too, but they had to move on because they didn't know if that sequel was coming. So when people would ask them, they would probably just brush across the question like, I'd love to see it too, waiting for it, and then move on to talk about whatever movie they were a part of in that current moment of time. You can brush upon the past and what happened, but you need to keep going. And the less you give people an in or space to kind of slither in and ask those questions, the easier it is for you to kind of move on. And then when you're in your own space, when you're with your friends who you trust and who you care about and who are actually helping you, you can share with them everything. You know, I'm sure Winona Ryder was like, I really want to do this in, you know, private with her friends, and like maybe she even talked to Tim Burton, was like, what's going on? Why aren't we doing this? And Tim Burton probably also had other projects he wanted to go do, which he did. Edward Scissorhands was one of them, and he had a lot of other movies that came out from Beetlejuice, after Beetlejuice, so he had other stuff he wanted to explore, and then he came back. So how do we come back and not make it weird or awkward? How can we go back to a place in time and continue from there and not make it this huge to-do? And a comparison to our own lives would be like, how do you go back to a high school reunion or a college reunion or anything like that? Go back to your hometown during the holidays and see people that you used to know. And the same thing is, you can pick up where you left off, or you can just decide to say, you know what, I'm a different person. This is not the exact same circumstances as when I was 15 and weird and awkward and didn't know how to dress and my hair was super weird. My hair is slightly less weird than it was in high school. But you don't have to relieve anybody else of their questions about your life. You don't have to answer anything that you don't want to, and you don't have to make other people feel better about the choices that they've made with your life. If you've had certain things happen to you that you'd rather not share or talk about and other people bring it up, brush past it. If you're going back to your hometown, or you feel like you want to go back to a high school reunion and you don't want to run into this person or whatever, you're all in different places in your life. It's a different context. There may or may not be certain emotions that you're facing, but you're there for a certain reason, and to focus on that. When Winona Ryder and all of the other actors came back together, I don't know why I'm blanking on all of them, but they had to decide to move forward and to take this new script and to work with that. Because in this one, Winona Ryder was not the main character as she was in the other movie. She was, but she also had to split that time with Jenna Ortega, and they have a lovely relationship and it's very sweet. But she did have to do that, and that is the thing that you have to realize. It is a different context. Even if it's a few months later and you want to get back together with someone, it's a different context now, and you need to appreciate that and realize that it is what it is and what is actually happening right now. Jenna Ortega starred in one of Tim Burton's other creations, Wednesday, and I don't know how many people know this, but she actually doesn't blink in any of the episodes in the entire show because she did one take where she didn't blink and he loved the intensity, so she was not allowed to blink for the rest of the series, which is fascinating. And he specifically wanted to do Beetlejuice 2 because he felt that she was the perfect person for that role. And that might be true for you as well. You might not want to go back to your high school reunion until you have gotten to a place where you actually want to go back to that place because you feel better and you feel like this is the right decision for you. Maybe you don't want to go back until you're in a stable relationship and nobody's going to question you about the divorce that you went through. It is up to you to decide what is going to make you feel safe and feel better. And that is our entire goal in this life, is to make sure that we're in a good place and that what we're doing is helping us get to a better place for ourselves, and there's no neutral action. Nothing is just, it just so happens to be this or happens to be that. No, it's either giving to you or it's taking from you, and you get to decide how much it's going to come from either side. You get to decide if going back to that small town or going back to that reunion or going to see those friends who randomly reached out after years, if it is worth your peace and your patience and your time to go and spend it with these people. Tim Burton didn't want to do Beetlejuice 2 until he found the perfect actors and reprised the other roles, so he did it on his own timeline. And you would think that 36 years after the fact that no one would care. But because the first one did so well, he was able to carry off of that, and we are living in a time of nostalgia movies. Everything is having a second version or sequel to the previous one. Top Gun had it a few summers ago. Twister is a remake. So remakes and sequels to probably one of the two original movies that changed the world when they came out. So it'll be really interesting to compare how people view classics after this era of remaking and sequeling such big movies. So I'm sure we can do a video about that, and when we can learn that there is a lot to be said about there is a second chapter to a story that you thought has ended, and it's up to you to decide if you want to do that. Nobody forced Tim Burton to do anything he didn't want to do, and how could they? Nobody associates Tim Burton with this only. He has Edward Scissorhands and Nightmare Before Christmas and a bunch of other movies that I cannot think about or can't think of right now, and they all, in their own right, changed the landscape. So you are doing things every day that are changing your life and growing it and making it better, and you do not have to feel obliged to continue any of these stories if you don't want to. You probably aren't working on the same thing that you did when you entered kindergarten. That project that you spent so much time on in 4th grade where you painted all of the letters and you got all of the little boards, you're probably not working on that project still. You get to move on, and you get to decide to move on. There are certain things in your life that you have come back to and that you are always doing, and that's really the third idea that comes from this. Tim Burton, when you hear that name, you associate it very clearly with certain movies and a certain genre, and that it's within movies or TV shows, film in general, and then horror or scary, evil kind of things. That might not exactly be the genre, but stuff of that. And you can see the similarities or the closeness in Edward Scissorhands and Beetlejuice. Like, they're not all the same movies, but you can tell there's a certain flair from him. And that's what you've been doing your whole life too. You're not doing the same projects you did in high school or college or at your first job or whatever. Even if you're at the same job, you're not working on the same projects you did your first day. And that's the thing. You get to grow up and develop and change your perspective, but there's probably an underlying connection between all the things that you've done. For me, I've always enjoyed writing and the environment and the idea of math and science and engineering, and a lot of the work that I do in the things that I'm interested in connect to those things. And you should continue to build on those as much as you can. I loved reading as a kid. And I recently, the other day, realized I was like, well, I was obsessed with Twilight and other books like that, like The Hunger Games. I liked those, Percy Jackson, like that fantasy world. And now that A Court of Thorns and Roses is popular in the media, I was like, you know what? I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be interested in reading that, but there's other people that I follow who are super interested in it or have said that it's been good, and other friends who've said it, and I'm like, all right, well, when I was a kid, I was interested in fantasy and those kinds of stories, and honestly, now reading that book, there's a lot of similarities. It's like a fae or a fairy or whatever they're called. It seems like if you combine a vampire and a werewolf, I don't know, I could be wrong. I've only like 100 pages in. But I was like, I don't need to feel like, oh, I need to be cool and not do what everyone else is doing. It's a book. And that's it. It doesn't have to mean anything more than I assign it. So I got the series. We'll see when I finish it. Maybe we can talk about that. But at the end of the day, like, you do not have to uphold anything, and you don't have to let go of anything that you don't want to. You get to decide, hey, I liked reading and writing as a kid, or I liked playing soccer as a kid. You don't have to give that up if you don't want to. You're probably, if you're not a professional soccer player at this point, you're probably not going to be, but if you found joy in it, go and play soccer with your friends on the weekend. Join a club. It doesn't have to be the thing that dominates your entire life, but it's something that has probably been a theme in your life. It's something that was important to you. For Tim Burton, that genre has always been the thing that he goes back to. What's the thing that you go back to? If it's watching those types of movies, if it's watching horror, or if it's watching comedy, if it's watching whatever new movie's coming out and you like to dress up for it, and, you know, you probably would dress up correctly, you can do that. Like, there is nothing that you should feel like you have to do or you can't do anymore. If you watched Beetlejuice when you were a little kid and you want to dress up as Beetlejuice and go to the movie, go do it. And if nobody wants to go with you, do it by yourself. I always found it funny when people were like, I can't believe you go to the movie theaters alone. I'm like, I have to sit there in silence whether I know the person next to me or not. Like, I'm not talking to my brother the whole movie. Granted, this movie I totally did talk to him more often, but like the majority of the movie, I just had to sit there and eat my cauliflower wings that I got. You just have to. And if you go to a restaurant, you can go there by yourself too. And you can get dinner, because you're gonna have to eat in silence while you're chewing your food anyway. So don't let other people's beliefs about what you should or shouldn't be doing get to you. I'm sure Tim Burton heard constantly from the people who were his managers or agents saying, why don't you do a Beetlejuice 2? Everyone wants it. And he was like, no, I want to explore other movies. I want to direct other things. I want to build a name for myself outside of this one thing that worked out well. And that's probably what you've done too. You probably weren't like, all right, well, I figured out walking and man, this is it. Like, I'm never going to get in a car. I'm never going to get on a plane or a train. I'm going to stick with walking because this was the first thing that I got really good at, and I'm never going to try anything else. Nope. It's walking till I die. No, probably not. So if we don't have to do that in the smallest of circumstances, we shouldn't do it on the biggest thing, the thing that he worked on every single day for his life. And he has built a career over these 36 years that has given him the ability to create Beetlejuice 2. If he went on to be unsuccessful after Beetlejuice, if he was like, well, my next movie just can't possibly do as well as Beetlejuice 1, I'm not even going to try. Nobody would care if 36 years later he was like, I'm going to do a Beetlejuice 2. Yeah, I haven't been in the film industry for the past 20 years in any way that people care about. But I remember people cared about it, and I'm just going to do it. No. If he didn't have his career, nobody would care. If Wednesday didn't come out, if Edward Scissorhands, there's so many movies he's come out with that I feel so bad that I can't remember any of them. Nightmare Before Christmas, like all of these movies. If he didn't have those, he couldn't make Beetlejuice 2. And you have to, I guess we can say this is the fourth one. If you have gone through something in your life, it has gotten you here. If you have done different projects, if you've had different job experiences, you did different classes in college, all of it has brought you here and made it possible for this next step to happen. In college, I studied 2 different majors, but that was why I was able to go into a field that could combine the two. And I could share my experiences, and it actually was interesting to me. I didn't have to feel like, all right, well, I got this one job after school and I have to stay here for the next 30 years and not do anything else. Tim Burton was the original person who was like, I don't have to stay here for the rest of my life. I'm going to branch out, see what else is out there, and then I'll come back to this if I want to, but only if I want to, because I am going to make a career and a name for myself that lives outside of this thing that people have pigeonholed me into. You don't have to live by what other people are telling you or by what you've done in the past. You get to decide today if this is what you want to continue. If you want to wear the wrong colored Beetlejuice shirt to the theaters, you can do that. And then next time there's a movie you want to go to, you can try a little harder and get the color right. But you don't have to hold yourself up to this past, and you don't have to feel like the future isn't going to be as good as the thing that you have right now. Life will continue to get better if you continue to invest in yourself, if you do the things that you want to, and you don't give people more information than they need to know. You don't have to tell anyone about anything in any more detail than you are okay with giving. Don't show your emotion to people who are just going to use it against you. And that was a tough lesson that I had to learn. There was people who I was really close to when everything happened this year who I thought they were going to pull up for me and they were going to care and they were going to do all this stuff, and none of them did. And that, grieving all of that at the same time was really difficult, but it gave me this perspective that, like, you're right, it's not their responsibility. They were right. They didn't have to care that this happened to me. They didn't have to fight on my behalf or even ask how I was doing. But the flip side of that is I'm not talking to them anymore. They don't have a leg in my life. They don't have space in my life. They don't get to be in it. They made their choice. And I made it explicitly clear for them what that decision meant for me. And that's really what Tim Burton was able to do for all of us. He showed us that you can go create something amazing and then move on and then come back to it if you want to. Nobody could force him to do a movie or to not do a movie. It was up to his discretion, and he was going to do it in his time when he wanted to. You are on the schedule that is right for you. Nobody is ahead of you or behind you or whatever. You are not ahead. You are not behind. You will not be anywhere before you are supposed to and before you decide to be. He could have done Beetlejuice 5 years ago. Would it have been the right time? I don't know. Is it the right time right now? I don't know. And he doesn't know either, but he's doing what he can with the cards that he's been dealt with, and that's what all of us are doing. But we don't have to be obligated to live up to anyone else's expectations except for our own. He waited until he had the perfect group of people or the perfect actress to step in to play the daughter of Lydia. That was what he wanted to do. He made an awesome movie. I hope you go and check it out. Let me know what you think about Beetlejuice, Life, Tim Burton. He has some pretty cool stuff. I think I watched a lot of it. Just can't remember any of it. So, what have you learned about life? This is your life. Choose your life every single day. Whatever you do, make that the thing that carries you through all your choices. Let me know what you think about Beetlejuice and everything else. But this is your world. Live in it. Have an amazing day.